Good evening, friends. Once again, I'm grateful to Beyond Law CLC, in particular, Mr. Vikas Chatrat, and he's introduced the topic beautifully, talking about registration, transfer, and stamping of knowledge. Luckily, knowledge is free, as Rabindranath Tagore said in his famous poem, except insofar as, of course, there could be intellectual property issues. But this evening, we are going to talk about these three statutes of the British era in the context of their intersection. So, interplay would be obviously there in areas where they overlap, and that is when you're dealing with immovable property and more particularly transfer of immovable property. Otherwise, these statutes in themselves are so voluminous, they have so many facets, and there is such a huge lot of case law that I think that even if one were to speak on each and every statute separately, you would require 3-4 sessions at least for one statute to cover it up. But here the idea is then to have a laser sharp focus on, as if there were three circles intersecting each other like in a Venn diagram, friends who would have studied elementary mathematics. So, it is the intersection and the overlap that we are going to talk about. Registration Act 1908, Transfer of Property Act 1882 and Stamp Act 1899. They have different objectives, yet they are going to be in force, in play when you transfer property, more particularly by sale. So, what are the broad objectives of all of these? I think if one has to point out the odd man out, and that simplifies the equation, it is the Stamp Act. Stamp Act is basically a fiscal measure. It is essentially to raise revenue for the respective state government. It is a central law. The schedules prescribing the rates can be amended by the state governments, and 100% of the stamp duty comes to the state government. So, therefore, Stamp Act essentially is a fiscal measure, and whenever we want to understand any litigation connected with Stamp Act, even if it is in the context of a registered document, a registered sale deed which has been impounded, it is very clear that it has to be seen from the angle of a law which is taxing a person and raising revenues for the state government, like the income tax law and so on. So, it is expropriatory in nature and hence construed strictly by the courts. Now, Registration Act and Stamp Act, someone long ago told me, they say they are so similar and yet so different. Registration Act deals with documents, whereas Transfer of Property Act deals with transactions. I think this is the fundamental and the most important difference that we need to appreciate. Registration Act comes into play if and only if there is a document. If there is no document, if some oral transactions are permitted and allowed, there is no question of the Registration Act 1908 coming into play. You want to sell a piece of ring, a gold to someone, it's a movable property, not compulsorily registrable. The Registration Act, and there is no document that you are signing, Registration Act does not come into play. Transfer of Property Act, on the other hand, talks in terms of transactions and transactions of immovable property. Transfer of Property Act is not per se applicable to states. They notify either in totality or particular sections. As far as the state of Punjab is concerned, we have progressively notified sale, mortgage, gifts, etc. under the Transfer of Property Act. Earlier, exchange of any nature whatsoever and partition of any nature whatsoever, especially in the agricultural land, were not notified, and therefore, Transfer of Property Act was not applicable to exchange of rural agricultural land or partition of rural agricultural land by way of oral transactions. In 1989, there was slight change that if the property sought to be transferred, at least one of them is an urban property, then registration would be required. A notification under the Transfer of Property Act was issued. So, therefore, to begin with, rather than building up this as a climax, Stamp Act is a fiscal measure, Registration Act deals with documents, and Transfer of Property Act deals with transactions. So, coming to the salient features of each, Registration Act talks about documents, and what does it do? If any document has been executed between the parties, it is a private document. You could have a confidentiality agreement and it need not go into the public domain. So, the fundamental objective of Registration Act is not to transfer the property. The fundamental objective of the Registration Act is to make a transaction, a deed, an instrument come in the public domain. Once you register such an instrument, and by way of caveat, I am not talking about wills, and especially the wills which are deposited in the registrar or the deputy commissioner's office, they are an entirely different part of the Registration Act. We are talking this evening only of the immovable property, especially in the context of the sale. So, therefore, Registration Act makes those transactions public. More importantly, it lends a kind of authenticity to the transactions, because the sub-registrar who is registering the document is satisfying himself regarding the identity of the persons executing. Now, in this day and age of Aadhaar cards and biometric identifications and so on, which many states have incorporated, including the state of Punjab, it is a simple thing to identify. People are being photographed in real time and those documents are being uploaded. But in the good old days, when the Lambardar or an advocate would identify the person executing the document, the registration would lend a very, very important presumption of authenticity to the transaction that had been entered to between the parties. So, therefore, Registration Act hits at documents and it makes the documents public documents. So, what does the Registration Act say? Section 17 of the Registration Act is the most fundamental one insofar as the transfer of property is concerned. They say if there is immovable property valued over rupees 100, then anything, it is very widely worded, anything which purports to create, assign, declare, limit or extinguish right and property has to be registered. Now, here is the subtle point. Registration Act does not say that you must necessarily have a document to transfer property. All it is saying that if there is a document, then it must be registered. This is a question which is very commonly asked in our departmental examinations, that hey, you got this partition, memorandum of partition between brothers. It obviously extinguishes, creates, declares right, intercede the parties, intercede the co-sharers. So, why it is not compulsorily registrable? This is also a very fundamental difference that we need to underscore and underline in the very beginning. Registration Act talks in terms of an instrument, a deed, which by way of its execution actually leads to the sale, exchange, gift, mortgage. In anything which creates, assigns, declares, limits, extinguishes, mortgage with possession, without possession, all those are part and parcel of the requirements of the Registration Act. Now, an instrument of partition and a memorandum of partition. These example I will give you to illustrate the difference in the applicability of the Registration Act and the Transfer of Property Act. Now, if the brothers, three brothers, they want to divide their ancestral land, they sit together, they say this keyword, this khasra number is yours, 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 possession is delivered on the spot, and a memorandum of partition is merely a record of a transaction which already has been effected. It kind of post facto narrates what has happened, and on the basis of the same, you can actually go to the Halka Patwari and ask him to enter a mutation which would be incorporated eventually into the revenue record. On the other hand, so therefore, the memorandum of partition is not purporting to create, assign, declare, limit or extinguish interest in immovable property. It is merely recording a transaction which already has been done. So that memorandum itself is not compulsorily registrable. Actually, it is an oral transaction, and memorandum is merely the record of an oral transaction which already has been effected. So therefore, this used to be the case in exchange also, and even today, at least in the state of Punjab, if you want to exchange something in agricultural land, and that exchange is something where the consideration is not wholly money. So therefore, actually you can have an exchange where partly properties are being exchanged and partly financial or pecuniary consideration is there. But in same way, if you want to have an instrument of exchange, it will be registrable, the stamp duties issues will come in. But otherwise, you are in Taran, your brother is in Bathinda, you want to exchange property, equivalent value, no stamp duty, no registration at either place. It is an oral transaction. The brothers may reduce in writing a memorandum of partition to say, all right, this has been carried out. And it is always useful where you have these memorandum of partition, a private partition, Khangi Taqseem, Khangi Tabadla, a private exchange, to immediately report to the Halka Patwari so that he can enter a mutation, so that there is a record of the partition or exchange having been effected. In fact, under the Land Revenue Act, where we sit as Financial Commissioner Appeals and so on, and all the litigation connected with partition, one of the fundamental questions which is raised is that, all right, since 3 generations, sir, our private partition has taken place, although the ownership or the khewat is joint, but we are sitting in separate places. What if this khewat is joint? Then the question immediately would arise that if it has been so, why did you not get it implemented? So that is an aside, that if there should be any such oral transaction which has been effected, in respect of which a memorandum of exchange or partition has been done, it does not require to be compulsorily registered, well and good, but please do inform the Halka Patwari. Mutation would be sanctioned in case of partition within the same village, and in case of exchange, if they are outside the revenue state, then 2 mutations of exchange would be entered and sanctioned, thereby kind of sanctifying into the revenue record that this transaction has taken place. Now, coming back to the Registration Act, when you register a document, let us say a sale deed, so you get a copy of the sale deed with beautifully embossed stamp and so on. These days we got e-stamping, and there is another copy which is stuck in the appropriate book of the sub-registrar. So that is a public document. So any person who wants to search the title for a particular village, for a particular revenue estate, for a particular property, then he is expected to go through this entire chain. And how does he go through? Because there is a copy in the revenue record already there. So therefore, it becomes a public document, and the point which I am making is very important. I may not be able to quote the legal authority, but should there be by any chance a discrepancy between the copy that you've taken away and the one which is stuck in the office of the sub-registrar, then my understanding is that the copy which is there in the office of the sub-registrar, that is the one which is, unless proven otherwise, to be the more authentic version of the transaction. So therefore, when you are actually executing a sale deed or any other deed, these are computer printed these days. Please go through word by word what you are getting. May have a khasra number missing in the copy which is stuck in the office of the sub-registrar, and civil litigation which is lengthy in nature can initiate, because ultimately the courts will rely upon whatever is the copy in the office of the sub-registrar. This is very important. This equally applies in case of registered wills, but that is a more dangerous territory which I am not able to speak on with some degree of authority. Another thing which is very clear is that mere registration does not confer validity on a document or a transaction which is void ab initio. For instance, you don't own the property, you get it registered. For instance, the person has died and you as sons are claiming, but he's left a will. Mere registration is not going to confer any validity whatsoever. So, that would be a question of civil litigation. It would be, of course, evidence of a factum of a transaction. The transaction could be void, could be voidable, but mere registration would not confer validity on a transaction which is ab initio void. There are two other things. Again, I would request the friends to find the legal backing of these. What happens if under these two circumstances you go ahead with a particular sale deed? Of course, one is the property is under attachment by the orders of a competent court, and other cases the property, in respect of that property, either a temporary or a permanent injunction has been issued by the appropriate court. Now, my understanding is that in case of attachment, and when you attach property, you enter a report into the Roznamcha of the Halka Patwari, the rapport number finds mention in the remarks column of the record of rights. But irrespective, if a particular property has been attached, sometimes there is no record of rights available in the urban areas, and the property is under attachment, any registered sale deed is null and void ab initio, does not transfer the title. However, in case of injunction, if you do it, the parties entering into the transaction as well as the sub-registrar, if he had the knowledge, could be open to the contempt of the court, but the transaction is not void per se. This is a very subtle point sometimes we deal with in our mutation proceedings. Another question which especially young IAS officers, when they come and sometimes on the forums of the governance reform, citizen-centric land revenue administration, we talk, they say, sir, why do you have to have a dual business? We go to the sub-registrar, the copy of the record of rights of the Jamabandi is there, I am reflected as the owner, and once that is there, registration is done, automatically the revenue record by way of a mutation should be updated. Why do we have this double thing? First a person goes and he is harassed in the office of the sub-registrar, and then he is after the Halka Patwari to enter a mutation, and when the mutation is entered, then the Tahsildar or the Napsildar as the assistant collector grade 2 has to come and sanction. Some people can raise an objection and so on. Why don't we, when there is such a sanctity attaching to the registration, why should we have this business of mutation being a separate proceeding under the Land Revenue Act? It is very important to understand that the objective of the two is very different. Under the Registration Act, what is being agreed upon and what binds is the two parties that have entered into the transaction. A is selling the property, B is buying. It does not bind a third party, a stranger is not bound by this transaction. On the other hand, although the recital could be there that you have passed on the title, the possession of the property, but whether it has actually passed on spot or not is something for the mutation proceedings to investigate and decide. So, in mutation proceedings, it is not the transaction per se. In fact, the procedure is once a document is registered, Parcha Yadasht, a memorandum of registration goes to the Halka Patwari, even without the person proactively approaching, you have the facility of the mutation being entered. But mutations, sir, are to be decided in the open gathering of the village. You may have sold the property, but you may have entered into an agreement to sell with some other party, and that party may be in possession of that property, may raise an objection there. You are claiming to own the property as having inherited from your father who's passed away, but your brother could be producing a will. So, all these questions are answered in the proceedings which take place under the Land Revenue Act, distinct from the Registration Act, and there is a whole procedure of appeals and so on up till Financial Commissioner, Revenue, powers of revision, and ultimately you can also go to the High Court. Therefore, registration, yes, it binds you, but if you're talking about transfer of property, especially sale, please do not forget to get your mutation A entered, B sanctioned. There is a whole lot of, it may be a slight digression, but it is relevant at this point, whole lot of case law saying that mutation does not confer any title. It is merely the recognition of a title which has already been transferred. Very good theory. But sir, today you get a registered sale deed registered and you forget all about the mutation. Next record of rights is prepared. Your transaction has not been entered. The previous owner continues to be shown and reflected as the owner. Another 5 years passed. You may be in the possession of that property, but the same old owner who has actually alienated his property to you through a lawful valid document continues to be reflected as the owner. And tomorrow, the same Land Revenue Act, under which we say that mutation does not confer any right, under section 44 of the Land Revenue Act, it says that there is a presumption of truth to the entries standing in the record of rights, and especially when they are long standing. So therefore, fine, it is a fine legal nuance that mutation does not confer any title, but if you are buying property and mutations in respect of that area are being entered and sanctioned, please do not leave it to chance. Please get the mutation sanctioned so that your ownership and your right is duly reflected there. Otherwise, the same person could be selling it off to another person on the basis of his entry into the record of rights. He could be raising loans. Those could be fraudulent deals, agreed. But then you would be the person getting into that civil litigation. Another point which I would like to emphasize, since I'm talking essentially on the intersection and also from the angle of a person who's dealing with property, the focus is less on our legal fraternity, but my focus of this talk is more on a person, and we in our individual capacity, apart from being professionals, would be buying and selling property at some point in time. So, what is there regarding a sale to be effected or any transfer of property to be effected under the Registration Act qua a sub-registrar? The underlying fundamental principle which is immutable, there can be a few exceptions, we are not here discussing those exceptions. A person has to necessarily appear before a sub-registrar once. And why I am saying that? You could say, well, I am not going to go, I am going to give someone a power of attorney. Well, sir, your property is situated in Amritsar, you are situated in Chandigarh, you want to give a power of attorney to a member of your family, to an advocate, a trusted friend, you go here, your proof of address is here, fine. You will have to personally appear before the sub-registrar in Chandigarh for the registered power of attorney. A power of attorney duly registered in the office of the sub-registrar is the only one which can actually then be used by your attorney holder to get the instrument executed. In other words, attorneys, whether attested by a notary public, whether by a judicial magistrate, whether by an advocate, whether by an executive magistrate, insofar as they deal with immovable property, insofar as they deal with eventually selling off of that alienation and permanent alienation of the immovable property, they have to be duly registered. So, the underlying principle is that once you have to appear before the sub-registrar, irrespective whether you do so at the stage of execution of the power of attorney or whether you do so at the stage when you actually go in your personal capacity to execute that particular document. Now, we talked in terms of Transfer of Property Act. We said that it hits at transactions. On the other hand, the Registration Act was hitting at documents. So, one would say, what, sir, is there prohibiting me? After all, sale, purchase of gold, of iron, movable property worth crores of rupees takes place. You receive the money through check, hand over the property, hand over the gold coins. You may enter into an agreement. Where is it written that if there is an oral transaction of sale, why should law have any problem? Registration Act is only hitting at documents. I have handed over the possession, I have taken my money, and if the person wants to get it registered into mutation and so on and so forth, it's his problem. But why should law? The law comes into play because the Transfer of Property Act says that these transactions, if notified, especially sale, I think it's section 54 of the Transfer of Property Act, gift, etc., so on and so forth, these require to be registered under the Registration Act. So, the beauty is the Registration Act per se does not make a transaction of sale compulsorily registrable if there is an instrument. If there is an instrument, yes, section 17 of the Registration Act would apply, but an oral transaction qua sale, etc., is void ab initio. So, if you people go, two people before the an Sildar or a Tahsildar with mutation proceedings to say, sir, I have sold my property, I have received this payment through check and I have handed over the possession, kindly sanction the mutation. The answer is no, this transaction is null and void and would be summarily rejected insofar as mutation proceedings are concerned. So, we talked about the memorandum of exchange and we talked about the memorandum of partition initially by way of distinguishing the two, but again at cost of repetition, those memoranda are merely the record of oral transactions that have already taken place, and if in the state in which you live, partition and exchange are not notified under the Transfer of Property Act, then oral transaction accompanied by a memorandum and followed by a mutation does not require registration. Therefore, there is no question of registration fees, stamp duties, etc. However, if you have an instrument of partition, if you have an instrument of exchange, then irrespective, you would have to have compulsorily registrable and stamp duty issues would also come in. Now, in order to enforce this registration, and there is similar provision in the Stamp Act, what is the effect of non-registration, or what is the effect of a particular document not being properly stamped? As I said, you have to put the Stamp Act through the lens of its being a fiscal measure. So, therefore, if you are going to have documents and instruments which are not properly stamped, are unstamped, understamped, the sovereign revenues of the state government are suffering. If that is the case, then you still go ahead. You say, okay, I am ready, I am willing to take that risk. But tomorrow if there is a dispute, kindly, sir, go through section 35 of the Stamp Act. It's very clear that any understamped or unstamped document would not be admissible as evidence, and the section is very, very widely worded. Not only courts, you have various quasi-judicial tribunals, so on and so forth. So, the very objective for which you perhaps created that instrument would lose its value and purpose and objective, because section 35 immediately would come into play, and trying to save a few bucks or few thousand rupees on stamp duty, you could actually create a problem for yourself, because that very document will not be admissible as evidence. Similarly, you got section 49 of the Registration Act. Something was compulsorily registrable by virtue of section 17. You say, I don't bother, he's my friend and we quite believe and our word is worth more than the paper this document is written on. But tomorrow if there is a dispute between you, your legal heirs, assignees and so on, then section 49 very clearly says that this document, which is otherwise by law supposed to be compulsorily registered, compulsorily registrable, is not registered, then it would not be admissible as evidence of that transaction. Here the scope is slightly narrow in the sense it would not be admissible as evidence of that transaction, but for ancillary matters. For instance, if someone is wanting to produce what were his signatures in normal course of business, or criminal litigation where you say this is the authentic document, and on the other side you got some other signatures, to that extent non-registration would not bar, be barred under section 49 for it to be admitted as evidence. But for the purpose for which it was executed, section 49's bar would come in. Therefore, if you are understamping or unstamping documents, or not getting them registered, you are hit by the twin provision of section 35 of the Stamp Act and 49 of the Registration Act, and those papers literally would be not worth the paper that they are written on. Now, I have been talking about Stamp Act, and as I meander into Stamp Act, we talked in terms of its being understamped. Understamping is quite a simple type of a thing, that all right, this is, you say property worth 10 lakhs, if stamp duty is 5% ad valorem, it had to be 50,000 rupees, and you've put only 40,000, it is case of understamping. And understamping, immediately it will be recovered. The sub-registrar would perhaps not register it, and even if it does, that deficiency immediately can be recovered as areas of land revenue. The deficiency in the stamp duty is charged on the property. The property could be sold 10 times. The charge, the sovereign dues remain on the property in question, and whosoever is the last person, he would suffer. Of course, he would be at liberty to enter into civil litigation to recover the said amount from the people from whom he purchased, etc., and so on and so forth. But understamped basically means that you admit the ostensible consideration as being the true consideration, and with the reference to the schedule and the rates prescribed under the Stamp Act, you have not put the appropriate amount of stamp duty. On the other hand, you have a process of undervaluation. Understamping and undervaluation. Undervaluation is that this property, this flat situated in Mahali, you are saying it is worth 1 crore. The sub-registrar says, मुझे दिखाओ जी 1 crore में कहाँ मिलता है, this is worth 3 crores. And therefore, it is undervalued. So, two things are happening. Unaccounted money is getting into circulation. B, from a Stamp Act perspective, the state government's dues are being eaten away. So, now in this day and age, we have got what are known as the collector rates and the circle rates for each and every area. Now, this is virtually a practice which is prevalent all over the country and has also been recognized under the Income Tax Act. The question of circle rates, the collector rates, which are revised for type of property, quality of land, urban, institutional, residential, and also in terms of the superstructure. So, if you present any document which is undervalued, yes sir.